however it works out. Hello, folks. Welcome from Louisiana and welcome from Scotland, right? Not Sweden yet.
Not Sweden yet. That's not until mid-August.
Today, you are being joined by two beer friends, yet two political arch enemies. Louisiana Beer Reviews and currently Rampant Lion, Moscow Goddard Radio Moscow, formerly.
Yeah.
Rampant Lion Videos. And I'm finishing off a wretched little monster called Venus, the Bringer of Peace. And it's an ironic title because this beer brought me no peace. It brought me...
Is that from the brewery who do the beers that are all the different planets?
Mm-hmm.
What are they called again? I saw that on the internet once, but never managed to find it.
Bells. It was brought to me by two fellow beer reviewers. I haven't tried any one but the Venus. I don't know why they brought me the Venus. I guess they were curious what I would say about it. I read some written reviews. They were not particularly positive. Oh, wait, I haven't read the written reviews yet, sorry. But I watched video reviews, and one guy said he didn't like the beer, but he admitted that he didn't care for the style, which I don't like the style either, flavored beers. And then everyone else said, they just said it was bad. It's bad. To me, it tastes like if you, if you have that acid reflux and stomach acid comes out.
Mm.
So I don't really think that's what they were shooting for, but
I've never heard a beer described quite like that, but fair enough.
Yeah, eat a bunch of spaghetti with the really strong acidic red sauce and start kind of coughing it up or whatever you call it, burping it up, and you'll get the. It's really a strange beer, but I could say that it might grow on me over time, but there won't be a second time. So.
Oh yeah. No, I need to get a hold of those ones and try them. I'll maybe write to the brewery and ask, I'm an astronomer from Sweden. Can you send me your beers and I'll review them for you?
Right.
I
want the stomach acid one especially.
Oh yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Anyway, it's not that bad, but it's memorable. All right. So. I don't know if I'm sure there is a holiday similar in the United Kingdom, but over here we have Memorial Day, which is the last Monday in May, and it's in memory of soldiers killed in wars. So you can imagine on Facebook, people are putting a lot of real sentimental posts, with the, you know what I'm talking about, the pictures of the child crying, holding a flag, or some cartoon of the profound nature of soldiers dying for their country. You know the theme.
Yeah. No, ours are a little bit different, obviously, because a lot of our stuff kind of goes around the basis of the poppy, because normally for us it's November the 11th, which I think for you guys is Veterans Day.
Yeah, and Veterans Day memorializes anyone who's ever been in the military. So it's just all veterans. Could be someone who, I know a man that lives down the street from me, and I said, Mr. Leonard, you were in World War II. That must have been interesting. He said, well, I just sat at a typewriter in New Orleans in an office. So he's a scrawny little man, and so when the Army looked at him, they said, you'll be typing the whole war. So he he was not a combat veteran by any stretch of the imagination, but he's a veteran, so he would get honors during Veterans Day, but Memorial Day would not apply to him.
Oh, okay. And our memorial, sorry, I keep calling it Memorial Day, but our November the 11th, that was just obviously to coincide with the
armistice.
The ceasefire on the Armistice Day, but it's kind of controversial, obviously, because the British soldiers killed a lot of Irish Republicans in Dublin and things like that. So there is, the Irish actually have, interestingly, they have their own poppies and things, but there's been big disputes over that before. So in Scotland, obviously, we have the Celtic football team and Rangers football team, and normally all of the soccer teams have a poppy embroidered onto their jersey, but there's a bit of a controversy about from Celtic's point of view, because Celtic were obviously founded by Irish immigrants that came to Scotland, and then obviously the British have killed Irishmen in Dublin and things when Ireland wanted independence. So there's a bit of a controversy there, but I think It's overplayed. It's overplayed by a lot of people in Scotland. We still get some of the rubbish that comes from Northern Ireland with Catholics versus Protestants. And to be honest, in Scotland, a lot of us just don't care. A lot of us don't want anything to do with that. But there are very small groups who want that to come. But I mean, overall, most people will look at November the 11th as a way to remember people that stood for democracy. Really, that's the main thing. But but this year it was special, obviously, because we had Victory in Europe Day as well. So we had VE Day, and that was just because it was the 70th anniversary. So most likely that's the last major anniversary that a lot of the older guys will get to see.
Right.
So we had, but one of the other big things we have actually.
Let me interrupt you for a second. If you have Facebook on, if you don't mind putting that off, because it'll chime the whole time and it's kind of irritating for the viewers, not to mention the host.
Yeah. Okay. There we are.
You keep talking. I'm going to get some water because I know I'm going to get thirsty during all of this talking. So keep going. I can hear you fine.
Oh yeah. Where's my video feed gone? I'm trying to find how to get back to this now. It's disappeared. There we are. Got you. Yeah. So we have one of the things that's also special. When I was in the Air Force cadets here, we used to have 3 parades. We would have one. I can't even remember what the third one was for, but in the Air Cadets we always did the Battle of Britain Sunday, which was usually in June, and then we always did Remembrance Sunday as well. And that was one that we did every year. And I think that the Naval Cadets and the Army Cadets had their own one that they would do, because Battle of Britain Sunday was one that we only used to do, and we used to get taken to Stirling for that, which is the kind of the biggest town sort of nearby, and they would have all the different local squadrons go out and do this parade. So we would go up and lay a wreath on the poppy wreath on the memorial and things like that. But
okay.
Those are the main ones that we do.
Now do me a favor, could you put that shade open? I want to see that it's still a little bit daylight in Great Britain.
Oh, in Scotland, not so much Great Britain, but it's still a little bit. You can't really see outside that much, I don't think. Oh, you can.
Oh, yes, I can.
Yeah. We are.
The sun go down. Wait, now, isn't that island Great Britain?
The island is Great Britain, but a lot of people in Scotland object to being called British now, particularly the younger people.
Right. Well, anyway. All right. So the concept is that, we do. Now, first, let's preface this by saying, yes, we do feel for the soldiers who have died. It's not to, when you take an anti-war position, sometimes people get very irate because they say, you don't care about the soldiers who died. But no, that is not true. I do care about the soldiers who died. I don't blame them in most cases, although, of course, some commit atrocities, and so they have to answer for that. I don't blame the civilians who were killed. This is not about that. This video is about the concept that war in general, although I know there's exceptions where a country could be forced to fight a war, although in most cases that's not the case. In most cases that's not really the reality. But how war does not make a people free or maintain their freedom. And I'm going to go through the American wars real quick, and then the British wars, and then we can discuss the concept in general and maybe bring up wars, and we'll probably won't agree but I think you agree with the overall concept that war does not generally make a people free.
Not particularly. I would agree that what you're saying is right generally. There are some exceptions, like you say, but
it helps.
Most of the time it's a government's policy. In the Western world, at least, it's government policy that determines the level of freedom.
And a lot of people, or not a lot of people, there are some people that can make a lot of money off of war. We know that people can profiteer off of it, but I don't think we should have big wars so that a select group of people can profiteer. Now, in America, we had the colonial wars, but we're not going to get into that because that really would be British history, right? So up until 1776, American history was British history. Okay, 1776, they got this idea, we're going to break away from the great tyranny of Great Britain, who wants to make us pay this 1 penny tax. So oh, we're going to have this war. So they fought this war that lasted 8 years, and thousands of people died, and a lot of property was destroyed. And the United States broke away and became a republic and got their freedom. But we know today that that could have been done without a war, because I did videos on Commonwealth realms where British colonies eventually acquired very, progressively stronger degrees of independence. So that war was not, in my opinion, necessary. They just wanted to break away so that they could run the show without accountability, and which is what they did. So, okay, hooray, we have a republic now, a union of states. So the first big war, in my opinion, was unnecessary, and it did not make us free, because we could have gotten freedom anyway. And to a large extent, the 13 colonies were free. They were internally self-governing in almost every way, and the British overlordship was minimal. I mean, they were not too strict. All right. We go to the War of 1812, which I don't know if you're too familiar with that. It's not well taught. It's not well covered in Great Britain or Scotland or England or the UK or whatever you want to call it.
No, I've never really heard much about that. I know the name, but not very much.
But what happened there was you had it falls within the context of the Napoleonic Wars. So the British were fighting the French, and you know that whole story, and they had the blockade, and the Americans were making a lot of money off the war. Actually, the New Englanders, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, they made a lot of money off that war because they were able to ship war material to the French and the British and make tremendous profits. Even if 1 out of every 3 ships were captured, it didn't matter, because the profits were so high, it was worth the risk to have ships captured. But you had Americans in the South, West and the South, places like Tennessee, Kentucky, even Louisiana to an extent. They had their eyes on Canada and Spanish America. And so they were looking for a pretext. And you know just as well as I do, a pretext is not the reason for the war, it's the excuse that's given. So they didn't say, oh, we have to fight Great Britain because we want to seize a bunch of land. That doesn't go over too well. So they said, oh, we have to fight the British to protect freedom of the seas. Those British are stopping our ships and searching them. But it's interesting, because the main group of Americans that were pushing for that War of 1812 against Great Britain were people that lived in the South and the West, who were almost never involved in shipping. So their property was almost never impacted by the war. But the people whose property was impacted, the Northeast, New England states, and New York, didn't want to go to war because they were making so much money. They had no incentive to go. So, but they did get it through Congress. It wasn't a very easy thing. It didn't go over unanimously, but Congress voted to go to war. So what did the United States do? The first thing they did to protect freedom of the seas, well, of course, they invaded Canada. Just like the first thing the Americans did to protect their freedom in 1775 was to attack Canada. So that shows you right there, it wasn't really about freedom. It was about grabbing land. But they were very poorly led. Their commanders were not too good. And plus the country was divided. So these repeated invasions of Canada failed. And then the war ended up in a stalemate. The Americans were not strong enough to defeat the British, not even in Canada. And the British were preoccupied with Napoleon, so this war to them was a sideshow and an irritant. So after 3 years, they just called it off. Not even 3 years. It didn't even last 3 years. They just called it like psst. But a lot of people died, and the White House was burnt down, and York, Canada, today is called Toronto, was burnt down. So it didn't accomplish a lot except to kill a lot of people. So in my opinion, not justified in any way.
Sounds a bit like Korea.
And did it make America free? No. Did it protect our freedom? No. In fact, it had nothing to do with freedom. We go on with the Indian Wars. Well, that's an internal conflict with 2 different groups of people that want to control the same amount of land. And anyway, no one ever claims those wars were to protect us or keep us free. So those are irrelevant to the topic. The Mexican War, you know, Mexico. The United States and Mexico were fighting over the border. Nothing new, right? Well, of course, the Americans said the Mexicans were picking on us. The Mexicans said the Americans are picking on us. They had a war. Mexico was weaker, so they lost. And then the Americans were able to grab not only Texas, which they already had, but New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, and California. Pretty nice grab. Nothing to do with protecting our freedom. Mexico was about as much a threat to America's independence as Uruguay. So, and it wasn't to maintain our freedom, because Mexico, you know, Mexico is very weak. So that was a farce. And anyway, no one even claimed it was to protect us and keep us free. They just said Mexico is picking on us, which is a laugh. The war between the states, that's an internal conflict in a way, because it's a group of states fighting another group of states over a long-standing set of issues that they had, that were going back to 1775. Okay, these states had a lot of different worldview. You know, they had a differing worldview, and they had different goals for America. So, plus they just generally did not like each other. So they had a war, and the weaker side lost. No surprise there. Had nothing to do with keeping America free, because the Confederate states who broke away weren't about to try to take over the northern states. They just wanted to break away. So it had nothing to do with keeping us free or maintaining our freedom. It was just about, we're strong, so we can dominate you. And we did, or they did, in the Louisiana view of it. Going on to the Spanish War in 1898. You may have never heard of this war. The United States decided to attack Spain. Why? To keep us free? Well, you know Spain, how weak they are. They haven't won a war in 400 years. So they don't have a very good track record. A perfect victim, a weak country with a few remaining colonies that can't fight their way out of a wet paper bag. So what do? They look for an excuse. They find a handful of rebels in Cuba who had been fighting against the Spanish for 70 years with very little success. And the Americans made this big propaganda thing about the evil Spanish butchers murdering all the poor Cubans. Only problem was about 99% of that was a lie. But anyway, you know, why let the truth get in the way? So they attacked the Spanish and seized Cuba, Puerto Rico, Wake Island, oh, I'm sorry, Guam, not Wake Island, Guam, it's a Pacific island, and the Philippine Islands. So what was the war really about? Protecting the Cubans from the Spanish butchers? Well, you know, James, what the war was really about was what?
Territory.
Grabbing that land. I want your stuff. Okay, now, World War I. How could America joining World War I keep us free or protect our freedom, maintain our freedom? I would love for someone to demonstrate that to me, because we're over here on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, and y'all are over there in Europe. And what was World War I? A war to keep the world safe for democracy?
No, it was just a fight over imperialism.
It was a turf war, like street gangs in New York or Glasgow fighting over who controls this turf. And my group is stronger than your group. Ridiculous, right?
Old powers scared of new powers.
Huh?
Old powers scared of new powers.
Right. And not only that, we're going to kill 10 million people just to show who's stronger. Now, the United States had no business getting into that war. But Great Britain, as you know, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, or at that time, the Great Britain and Ireland, they were masters of getting other people to fight their wars. So they used to get into these wars and they would find themselves in a real pickle. But then they had a great card to play. And their card was their former child, America. And they got America to jump in and win the war for them. Smart move. Then we go to World War II, another turf war. It was sort of like World War I Part 2 is what I call it. World War I Part 2. Germany says, we want our stuff back. The British said, no, you're not getting it back. And we're going to make sure about it. And they said, okay, so we're going to have another showdown. And they have a showdown. And then we know it involves the Soviet Union. And that's a complicated situation, but it's the same old thing. It's a turf war. So how does this keep America free? Well, if you read the propaganda machine, Germany was such a danger. We have to jump in because Germany could endanger our freedom. I don't know how. They couldn't get across a 25-mile strait of Dover, but they're going to come 3,000 miles across the Atlantic and invade Virginia somehow. Okay, well, that's a farce if you think about it. If you don't think, then it's yay. Now, besides that, we're going to antagonize the hell out of Japan. Now, Japan and China had a lot of personal problems, yeah, they didn't like each other for a long time, you know, back to the days of the old dynasties. So once again, Japan and China are fighting, and the United States decides we're going to butt into this. Japan got irritated and kept warning the United States, leave us alone, stop picking on us. The United States said, no, we're going to provoke you because you're Japanese and you people get excited real easily. And so they were able to keep poking. So they fought back and they were destroyed because they were much weaker. Now we go to the current war. What's the current war? The Cold War, which started in 1944. The United States and Great Britain versus Russia. And we have all these little showdowns, right? We never had the big showdown. If we had the big showdown, you and I wouldn't be talking right now, more than likely. So they fought in Korea. Who gets to run Korea? The communists or the free countries? In other words, the United States or Russia? Well, we know how that worked out. Then we're going to go where else? Where's the next showdown? You know where.
Bosnia, wasn't it, no?
Vietnam. Don't forget about Vietnam.
Yeah.
So we're going to have a showdown in Vietnam. Our gang versus your gang. We know how that ended. Then we go up to the Iraq War. Saddam Hussein, a perfect fool. And you know, these big countries, they look for useful idiots, don't they?
Yeah.
Saddam Hussein, not a fool in a way, because he went to college and he had a degree and he had some elocution. You know, he had an ability to speak. He had a way with words. But in the final analysis, he was a fool because he had this idea that he could mess around with the United States and Great Britain. These are not people to play around with. They will kill you, which is what they did. He invaded Kuwait. And to be honest, that was an old territorial dispute going back to 1899 or longer, starting with Great Britain. But he walked right into the trap, and then they attacked him and easily beat him because Iraq has the strength of this ink pen. So then he was still around, so we know what happened in 2003. The United States decided to attack Iraq, and then your country stupidly jumped in to help us with another gang of countries. France did not want to go along with it because France is a strange country. They have this irritating tendency to think for themselves. And how dare they do that? But they said,
if I remember rightly with that one, Germany wasn't interested either.
No, because they had a lot of trade deals with Iraq. So why would France want to fight a country that they were friends with? So France said, no. And so the United States said, well, Iraq is so dangerous. They're so dangerous. They've never won a war, and they have no navy, and their air force is a joke. But they have all these weapons of mass destruction, which we know is a ridiculous joke. Of course, they never dropped atom bombs on Japan. But anyway, we attacked Iraq and easily defeated them. And then we have all these other little Arab conflicts that, you know, these American troops are out there in Afghanistan and over there in Iraq, and somebody will set a bomb off and somebody will get killed and they come back with one leg or no legs, and then the children are crying because their daddy was either killed or injured or their mother was injured, and then they send in a rocket and they hit a group of people at a wedding party and blow up a bunch of Arabs, and then they get mad and say, we're going to kill Americans, you know. So it's just a tit-for-tat theater of horror, really. Now, real fast, let's look at Great Britain. There's no use talking about Great Britain before 1689, though, because before 1689, you know, Great Britain never fought these foreign conflicts. Because England and Scotland were too busy fighting each other, right? They were always trying, the English were always trying to take over Scotland. You know that.
Pretty much.
And so France, who had a long-standing hatred with Great Britain, they would always help Scotland. Well, that makes sense because they had a common enemy. But you know, the strange thing was that when the last Tudor queen died, Elizabeth, who was the closest inheritor?
Oh, that certain King James of Scotland.
Yes, James VI, her first cousin once removed. So he becomes the King of England, and he's still James VI of Scotland. So it's not like England, I'm sorry to use that term. England did not take over Scotland. The King of Scotland became the King of England. So now they have a dual monarchy, right? And then we know what happened in 1707. They passed the Act of Union, and Scotland and England became the Kingdom of Great Britain, which many Scottish people were not thrilled about.
Pretty much.
But James, this is important because it is at this point, and we're not going to argue about should the British and the Scottish have united. You know, that's we could argue about that all day. But the point is that once they became a united country, then the British began to seek enemies elsewhere. And they had this idea, you know this, we're going to become the big shots of the world. We're going to run the show now. And so what did the British start to do? Build colonies around the world and fight over who's going to be the big man on campus. Now, who was their arch enemy in the 1700s?
Spanish and the French.
France, mainly, and Spain in a secondary sense, because Spain's star was already falling, right? So the British and the French battle it out in a series of turf wars. But France, as you know, was always the weaker country. So they would always lose. And the British got big and big, and then they botched the deal with the colonies with their bumbling ways, and they lost the 13 colonies. Oh, well, no problem, because the 13 colonies mainly are in alliance with Great Britain ever since. So, okay, your child got in a fight with you and they left home, but every time you get in a fight, they run over across the street into your yard and help you fight the neighbors. So it doesn't really matter. They just changed their last name and took your pictures down. But they always help you when you get in a fight. But the British had their big showdown with France. Now, was that justified, the Napoleonic Wars? This is interesting. This I'm not sure about. Can I justify the British fighting France over India or the Caribbean or North America or South America or Africa? No, I cannot, because these are two countries fighting over other people's land. And you wouldn't justify that, would you?
No, not at all. Imperialism at its finest.
I'm going to fight you because we both want to take the Indians' land in Canada and America. But that's the nature of countries. They fight over other people's land. So a lot of countries are guilty of that. Even the American Indians used to fight with each other over land before the white man showed up. Sometimes they would just fight over honor or just because they like to fight. Now, but the Napoleonic Wars, as you know, is a little different because you had the French Revolution. And what was the French Revolution? Was it a...
Take out the monarchy, basically.
Yeah, was it a movement just to change France? Or was it a movement to change planet Earth?
Probably, yeah, probably at the time just to change France, but then it became something that really changed the way that the world looked, because if you look at it later, one of the big motives in British domestic policy, which obviously to some degree affects foreign policy, was the fear that the monarchy could be overthrown. The establishment could be challenged.
Right. So with the French Revolution, to me, that is a little different because before, Great Britain and France would always fight over turf. Not a good thing, but it was sort of like an accepted thing. It's like you and I are fighting each other over land, and then they would battle it out and call it off after a while. But now this new war the revolutionaries in France, and you know, I'm talking about the Girondists and even more so the Jacobins. What was the goal of the Jacobins?
The Jacobites?
No, not the Stuarts. The Jacobites are the Stuarts who wanted to return James II and then, you know, Bonnie Prince Charlie to the throne in England and especially Scotland. And, you know, they had the Battle of the Boyne over there in Northern Ireland. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the Jacobins. Robespierre.
I've not studied the sort of France too much, actually. It was more Germany and Russia that I studied.
Okay, well, let me inform the audience. The Jacobins were the most radical of the radicals. You know, in the French Revolution, you had the Girondists. They were radical. They wanted to not necessarily get rid of the monarchy, but maybe keep the monarch as a figurehead, but they want to revolutionize France. Take away the power of the church, secularize the country, bring in the metric system, bring in a new calendar, declare the world year zero, and they want to get rid of all priests and religious around the world, get rid of all existing institutions, and overthrow all monarchies and bring the three-part revolution to the world, the tricolor flag: fraternity, brotherhood, and equality. Oh, I'm sorry, equality, fraternity, that is brotherhood, and what's the third plank?
Not quite.
I can't remember, but anyway, for some reason, mental block. All right, but anyway, you always see the tricolor flag. That's the 3 points of the revolution. Okay, now, but the Jacobins were more radical. They said we don't want to keep the king as a figurehead. We want to kill him. We want him dead. We want Marie Antoinette dead. We want this tricolor flag to fly over every country. We're going to spread this revolution around the world. Sounds familiar, right? Yes, because it evolved into international communism later on. If you go to the Communist Party of China or the Soviet Union, their idol was Maximilien Robespierre, the first true communist really in the world. In a way, the Khmer Rouge copied this man. Well, so the Jacobins instituted the Reign of Terror in France, the Reign of Terror, 1793, where they would sit around and argue about how many people they would have to kill. Some said, well, maybe we'll kill 20,000 people and have a revolution. And then I think it was the guy Carrier said, we might have to kill 100,000 people and have the revolution. And then one of the guys said, I would rather see France turn into a cemetery than for this revolution to fail. So, you know, the British said, oh, this is very dangerous. So, I mean, you had liberals in Great Britain that wanted to spread democracy and the Enlightenment and all that stuff, you know, because Great Britain had a strong Freemasonry there and all of that. But these were the radicals that even the Freemasons in England could not stand. So it's a very bad showdown. It's not a fight over territory. Now it's a fight over philosophy. The French Revolution is going to revolutionize planet Earth, or is the British slow, gradual, and steady progressivism going to change the world? The tortoise and the hare is an allegory. Great Britain is the tortoise. Slow and steady wins the race. Maximilien Robespierre is the hare. We must have this revolution everywhere now. So they have a showdown. So I don't know, was that war justified or not? It depends how you look at it. If you're a revolutionary today, if you're a communist today, if you're a member of the Socialist Workers' Party, maybe you think France should have fought and destroyed all existing institutions. And of course, if you're just a moderate liberal, which is very popular in Britain today, you would say, no, they had to destroy these radicals. So I'm not sure. Was that war justified or not? I don't know. We know Napoleon exemplified the revolution. Although he was a moderate revolutionary, Napoleon was a man, unlike Robespierre, who was a maniac and was murdered by his own bloodbath in 1794. But Napoleon wanted to have a revolution, but naturally, who did he want to lead the world revolution? France, of course. from Paris. And the British say, no, no, this world progress must originate in London. Those French people eat food with heavy sauces. And we cannot have these people leading the revolution, this progress. So they fought it out. And we know what happened. Eventually, France and Great Britain became allies after the 1815 when Napoleon was defeated, because Great Britain, as you know, began to, Great Britain likes to put their eye on people.
Mm-hmm.
They used to have their eye on France. France is the great enemy. Well, France was brought to their knees. So now who do they have their eye on?
Russia, was it not? And Russia.
Yes, the Third Rome. Russia helped Great Britain defeat France. Without Russia's help, France may have won. But the British become very paranoid about Russia because they had a reactionary government, emperor, and they have a very different idea of how the world should work. It should work, they want to turn the clock back to before the revolution. They want reactionary governments around the world, strong religious institutions. They want the landlords to rule, the serfs to do the manual labor. They want no democracy, and they want the authority of the fist. And this is the way of the world. This is the way of nature. This is what God has ordained. And naturally, Russia should lead this. What did the British say? No, no, no. We're not turning back the clock. And after all, if we're going to have progress in the world, it's going to originate from what city?
London, of course.
London, not St. Petersburg or Moscow. So they became terrible enemies. And what was the next big war for Great Britain? I'm not talking about these nicky-knack colonial wars. I'm talking about these serious, like the war against China, the Opium War. We all know what that war was about. So they could sell dope in China. Who could justify that? You wouldn't justify that.
Oh no, certainly not. But the British like to find excuses for many, many things.
Yeah, you know what their excuse was? The Chinese emperor was an evil dictator.
Oh, yeah, that's not far away from many British prime ministers and things like that, I guess. But here you are.
So we have to fight him so that we can sell drugs in China and profiteer, of course. We're making a lot of money off that white powder. Okay. But the big showdown was the Crimean War in 1753. The British and their newfound friend, Napoleon III of France, is going to fight Russia in the Crimea. And then Italy's going to jump in and help. Sardinia is going to jump in and help. Why? Because they wanted to make a name for themselves, because they had an agenda themselves to grab land from Austria. But that's another side story. Well, they fought that war for 3 years against Russia, and it was a disaster because the Russian generals were horrible, a bunch of old, incompetent men, and the British and French commanders were a bunch of old, incompetent men who were careerists and had no actual experience, really any good experience in warfare, and didn't know what they were doing. And all they succeeded in doing was getting a lot of people killed. And what did they do after 3 years? They called the war off. But they still taught the Russians a lesson. Don't play around or you will get attacked. I'm going to get some water, and I want you to start telling the audience who rose up in Europe and got the British very concerned right after this time period. There was a new country on the block that no one ever paid any mind to. But now when they start to consolidate, people become very afraid.
Well, soon after the points that Jay's talking about, it was really when Germany came into play. Of course, I think the year escapes me a little bit, but it was France basically was defeated by Prussia. And Prussia, as many of you know in today's world map, is what was now Poland. But Prussia was where Germany really began. And of course, the big scary thing for Britain and France about Germany was it had a larger population. So obviously, if you have a larger population than the two established countries, then of course that's going to be a problem because you can have a bigger army than they can. So really, Britain and France were very scared that their power was going to be changed. And of course, at that time, roughly, if you talk about 1870, roughly, you started to have Italy coming into it as well. You had the old established power of the Ottomans, who were at the point where they were starting to kind of break away and crumble a little bit. But the two main concerns for Britain, France, and Russia as well was Germany. Germany of course, was a huge country that was coming in at this point.
You're right. Now, the Ottoman Empire was an old world power of the medieval days. But by the time of the Renaissance, the end of the Renaissance, let's say the 1600s, they were going down, down, down. So they were not a big concern. The only concern people had for the Ottoman Empire was what land they could grab from the Turks. And they had a lot of fighting over that now because people are greedy, and who ever heard of sharing, right? So, but no one's concerned about the threat of the Turks. They're obviously not a threat. And in fact, there was no threat from Islam at the time. That was considered a backward, retrograde group of people that couldn't even run their own country. So no one was, the only concern people had for the Muslims at that time was, let's grab all their land. You know that. Because of tobacco at the time, and then they discovered oil, and then the British went berserk when they discovered the value of oil. But it was tobacco at one time. But still, they wanted their money, their wealth. But yes, Germany was irrelevant to the whole discussion because Germany was a collection of over 300 little tiny states, squabbling feudal states who had no power. They all spoke German. They all enjoyed to drink beer and eat sausage, but they were weak ever since the days of the 30 Years' War in 1648 when that ended. So people just ignored Germany, like, oh well. But like you said, Prussia was this more dynamic German state, and over the course of the 17 and up to the mid 1800s, they started grabbing land from people, but no one cared, no one cared. Now, but then the British started to care when Prussia was able to grab so much land that in 1871 they declared the new German Empire, which replaced the old Heiliges Römischer Reich, the old Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, which was never that strong, at least for hundreds of years. Now the British became very concerned because now you got one emperor, William, and this German people that are now marching in the same direction according to the same pattern. And Germany was a young country. I mean, it's an old country, but it's a young nation state. And they had a more dynamic economy. They were the fastest growing economy in the world in the 1870s. They had the best technology. It was sort of like they had a renaissance after these 200 years of depression and internal devastation from the 30 Years' War. Now there's this new vitalization. The Prussians were so dynamic. All this technology, you've heard of the companies Siemens and Bayer and Krupp and all of these companies. And so the British get paranoid, right? It's like, here's the Germans with a faster growing economy, a bigger population, and they're grabbing colonies around the world. Africa, West Africa, East Africa, the Pacific Islands. They were trying to build a railroad from Berlin to Baghdad in Iraq. And so the British became paranoid, and they said, well, maybe Russia's not the biggest threat. Maybe it's these Germans. And so what did we see develop all through the 1870s, 80s, 90s? Russia became less of a concern. And in fact, the British started to, what do you call that when you start talking to a country, start to
relate to the country, basically. Start to make concessions.
Yeah, they start cultivating the Russians, saying, well, we had some problems in the past, but how about those Germans, And the Russians said, well, okay. And then the French, they were mad at Germany because the Germans had busted up France in the 1870s, which is what helped Germany become a united country when they fought France and they defeated Napoleon III, and he was very embarrassed. And the French were very embarrassed, and they were so angry that they lost that land that they had stolen from Germany in 1648. But anyway, so
Alsace and Lorraine, that was a big point later on.
Alsace and Lorraine, they had been fighting over that since the days of Charlemagne, well, his grandsons. All right, do you want to go die for Alsace and Lorraine? Is there one person in Great Britain Scotland, Wales, England, Ireland, or America that is looking to die for Alsace and Lorraine? In fact, how many even know where it is?
Probably not so many.
All I know is Kronenbourg beer comes from there. All right. Kronenbourg. Now, who cares if Germany and France want to fight over a strip of land? But they did. They cared. So then there's this ongoing dispute between Germany and Great Britain. Oh, they don't like each other, even though they have the same grandmother, Victoria. And it's funny because they're the same type people. They're white. They speak a Germanic language. They're mostly Christian, or at least nominally Christian. They like to take over other countries' land in Africa. So in a way, they could have been partners. Maybe they could have taken over the whole world. But, you know, they're not going to do that. They're going to conspire against each other, plot against each other, line up friends against each other. And this tension just builds and builds and builds and builds. And this arms race, the British want to have this huge navy, and the Germans want to have this huge, modernized, technologically advanced navy and army, and then eventually Air Force. And they start to make plans. What would happen if a war broke out between our two countries? They even planned, what would we do if a war broke out? You know, the Germans had the Schlieffen Plan, which was
take away through Belgium and take take Paris. 6-week plan.
Yeah.
And it was that was drawn up in like 1895 or something roughly. And then they tried it in 1914, but they didn't expect the Belgians to flood the land.
Yeah, the plan had so many problems with it. And I would like to do a video just about that. But that plan was so faulty. In other words, it was saying, well, if these 26 things work perfectly, we might have a chance to win. Now imagine you're gonna go to war, and you're gonna base your country's future on that plan. If these 26 things work perfectly, we might have a chance to survive. And that was the plan. It wasn't, here's the plan to win the war. It was, Schlieffen said, here's a plan that could make Germany possibly survive. In other words, what he was saying was, we'd probably lose. But if we had any kind of chance of winning, it would have to work this way. Now, if I was an emperor and somebody presented that plan to me, my greatest goal would be to avoid war at all costs. But actually, we know that William II was trying to avoid the war because he was very concerned. But you know, his military leaders were saying, no, we can do this, we can do this. And he was saying, I don't know if we can do this. I'm very reluctant. I don't think we can win. Oh, no. But he was so angry at the British. You know, he hated the British because William II said, those damn British, they've been lining up countries against Germany for decades. They've been plotting against us. And now look what's happened. And if they're going to attack us like this, we're going to destroy them. We're going to wipe them out. We'll have no mercy. We'll show these people what's going to happen. You know, so, you know, that's the attitude he had. If they're going to bring this war upon us, we're going to strike them with this Germanic Führer. We're going to show them what the hammer of the German gods can do. We will bring down on them the enragement of Thor and Odin, all that, you know, that kind of German mentality, right? So when the war does break out in July 1914, and you could blame everybody because it was so ridiculous in all of their plotting. The Germans, they have that way about them. They just went crazy, right? You know, so they just went berserk, and they start blowing through Belgium. And the British were so happy because now they have their pretext to attack Germany. They wanted to attack Germany from the get-go, but they were looking for some reason. They said, oh, remember this obscure treaty that you signed in 1839 that no one ever heard of? The Germans said, no. Oh, yeah.
Treaty of London, was it called?
Huh?
The Treaty of London that was described as a scrap of paper.
Yeah. And they said, well, you said you would never attack Belgium if a war broke out. And the Germans said, oh, how dare you throw this treaty in our face? You violate treaties all day long. And they had this, like, it was like a dinner meeting, you know, they were eating dinner, and the Germans said, would you let your country be destroyed over a scrap of paper? And then, of course, one of the British guys at the meeting wrote that down. Oh, that sounds good. We could use that. So, you know, later on, when the war broke out, they were saying, oh, the Germans say that a treaty is a scrap of paper. And so then all the people say, yeah, that's terrible. Those damn Germans, they eat all that sauerkraut and they play too much music. We should destroy them. So, plus their mustaches are so long and they curl like that. We hate those people. So, you know, there was this ethnic hatred. You know how World War I was. The Germans saying the British people are they all wear short pants and cross their legs too much and they're effeminate. And the British say those Germans, they
eat babies and things.
They go to music halls and they drink big mugs of beer and they kill babies and they're a bunch of murderers and they want to take over the world. You know, that was the big thing in America. They want to take over the world. Germany wants to take over the world. And I remember as a child, my daddy would say we had to fight World War I because Germany was trying to take over the world. This is today a common belief in America that the reason we fought World War I is Germany was trying to take over the world. It is so ridiculous.
Pretty much. It's just, yeah. No, that was what people were told at the time, though. That was the thing.
But you know, they had that German sort of, they're not, what's the word? They don't have, they don't present themselves so well. So when they sunk the Lusitania, then the British say, oh, yay, ha, ha, ha. And then they could say, look what they do. They kill babies, you know. And the Americans who wanted to get into the war over in New York City, the president in Washington, D.C., Woodrow Wilson, yeah, now we can portray them. And all the Americans get scared. If we don't stop them in Paris, they'll be marching down Broadway and Times Square.
Yeah, well, that was the thing. It was the Zimmerman telegram as well. That was the other threat.
Yeah, they're plotting to get Mexico into the war. Well, the only reason Germany was plotting to get Mexico into the war was because they knew the United States were going to attack them. So, I mean, they say, well, we know the United States is going to attack us, so we may as well try to line up some help. But then the British, being the masters of spying and intelligence gathering that they found out about the telegram and they handed it over to the New York Times newspaper. And of course, they're going to make a big story out of it because they wanted to have a war. So that war was terrible. It did not make the world safe for democracy. It made the world safe for the British and French to expand their empire. It made the world safe for big companies to get rich, right?
Pretty much.
And it made the world safe for the British and the French to go grab all the Arab territories from the Ottoman Empire. And it also made the world safe for Japan to attack China, which is what they did. Now, I know when we get into the next war, that's where our agreement's going to break down bad, isn't it?
Possibly to some degree.
Because I think we agree on World War I, that it was a group of fools letting other people die so that they could get rich.
Yeah, pretty much. It was an imperialist struggle, pretty much. And I mean, I would always maintain the Second World War, the key changing point for me, I think, the point I would say is if Britain and France had stood with Hébert's government in the early 1928, I want to say, right, mid-1920s roughly, when Hébert came in, the Social Democrat Party in Germany, if they'd stood by his government and made sure there wasn't the various putschs that went on, if they'd stuck by Hébert and turned Hébert into an ally, then there was no room for Hitler. There was no room for him.
Oh, but that's not what they did. They continued to put the screws on Germany. And they say, you're down, and since you're down, we're going to kick you while you're down. We're going to kick you while you're down. And so Hébert became a nationalist and said, oh, well, if that's how it's going to be, and what did the Weimar government begin to do?
The Weimar government began to rearm.
They began to rearm, build up the German army again, and to secretly train in Russia. And the Weimar, this is the Democratic government, started to plan to get revenge on the Allies. Now, so a lot of times today, the Weimar government is portrayed as a benign government that was looking to just get along. That probably was the case at first. But when they realized that they were not going to get a fair shake, they said, okay, if that's how they want to play it, we'll play rough too. But then,
of course, as well as the American stock market crash with Germany.
Okay, that's correct. The World War I did not help the world economy. And then the American economy collapsed in 1928, and then it fully collapsed in 29. And then the American Republican Party did the stupidest thing ever. They set up enormous trade barriers, you know, protectionism. We're gonna raise tariffs to their highest level ever. And then they crashed the entire world economy. So they took a depression and turned it into the Great Depression. A lot of people don't realize this. The Great Depression was caused by government meddling. And so now the entire planet goes into a Great Depression. And Germany, who was already suffering so bad, we know this, and they had so many internal conflicts, the Nationalist Party starts to gain power. And the Communist Party was very strong too. But Germany was on the verge of a civil war, but then Hindenburg was very concerned about a civil war, so he appointed Hitler of the German National Socialist Party as the prime minister as an attempt to avoid a civil war, just like in Italy they appointed Mussolini, remember, in 1922 to avoid a civil war between the nationalists and the communists over there.
What we have to remember as well with that is that Germany was actually the economy in Germany was actually doing very, very well up until the point that, of the Wall Street crash, potentially. Because the 20s, there was actually, the 1920s, Germany's economy was starting to very much rebuild. And a lot of the history that we studied in school talked about the German Renaissance, and of course that was the start. The sort of end of that period was the start of when Ebert was in government, and as you say, it started to turn for him at the end. So I think it's important to mention that Germany was doing particularly well in the 1920s.
They were starting to come out of it because the United States bankers had bailed Germany out. Because remember, Germany and France were about to go to war in 1923, and the United States didn't want that. So they said, well, we'll loan you the money. And some people have talked about how this helped to cause the chain reaction that led to the crash 5 years later. But anyway,
Saarland Coalfields, yeah.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
But regardless, the world economy collapsed mainly due to U.S. government trade policy in 1930, and so then Germany enters this terrible crisis. So in 1933, Hitler comes to power. Remember now, when they were going to control Hitler, like, we know he's a bad radical extremist, but we'll control him because the conservatives in Germany will team up and to control this sort of questionable, or as they might say in England, not Scotland, but maybe England, this dodgy character, right? They say that down in London.
Oh yeah, pretty much.
This dodgy character. There's only one little problem. He was a little smarter than they thought, and the old man that ran Germany died because he was 88 years old. And so Hitler was like, really clever. So he ended up in about 3 years making himself the dictator of Germany, and the National Party became so strong they became the only party.
There's the state of emergency clause. Yeah, basically Hitler merged the position of chancellor and the position of president under the state of emergency clause. And under the state of emergency clause, that was when the freedom grab came in, basically.
Right. And then the Germans held an election asking the people, do you approve of all these measures that were taken? And about 90% of the people said yes. So Hitler would always brag, they voted for me to do this. And there's no evidence that the election was rigged, but they didn't realize, I'm sure the people voting for this weren't thinking about what was coming in 1944. But so we know, they're going to go round and round and round, and they're going to fight over Czechoslovakia, and they're going to fight over Poland. But in a way, it's the same old story, because you got France, who had all kind of internal problems. And then you got Great Britain, who's, they still want to run everything. We're going to run the world. We're going to run the world. And then you got Russia. And there's a big problem with Stalin and the Soviet Union and the USSR and all of that. And that's a different dynamic, right? Mm-hmm. But they were a bunch of liars because they claim we're here to spread the world revolution.
Mhm. But the other key thing to mention in the time at Europe is one of the key clauses in the Treaty of Versailles, of course, was that people had the right to national self-determination. So, of course, at this point, the national self-determination applied to everyone besides Germany. Germany actually defeated Russia in the First World War. And so, of course, Germany grabbed the territories that are now the likes of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, I think some of Belarus, and perhaps some of what is now Ukraine. And so, of course, in the Versailles Treaty, Germany was split in two. You had the Polish corridor to the sea, so you had what was East Prussia, part of West Prussia was seized and given to Poland. Then, of course, you had all these small independent Baltic states, which, of course, Russia took over later. But the key point was that you had the Sudetenland, which was given to the Czech Republic, but ethnically German. You had this area in Poland, which was part of West Prussia, and I forget what the other state name was called, but it was what is the western part of Poland now. Danzig, of course, which is now Gdansk, was German. And, of course, you had Austria as well, which was ethnically German.
Oh, yeah, you're talking about Silesia?
Yeah, Silesia. Yeah, in the Italian territory that they got. Yeah. So no, you had all of these territories. The thing that seemed to grate on Hitler, that really gave him momentum as well, was that national self-determination applied to everybody except Germany.
Right. So they enabled this guy to take control because they lied so much. They said, well, and you made the key point, self-determination. All the ethnic groups of the world, remember they said the world, could choose their own government. So the Arab people said, well, we'll have Arab governments. And the British and the French said, you certainly can have Arab governments under our guidance. And the Iraqis said, well, what do you mean under our guidance? Well, you'll have a free country of Iraq, and it'll have a British governor, and the British army will be there to protect you from yourselves. But so then the Lebanese and the Jordanians and the Iraqis realized very quickly that the fix was in, that they weren't going to get independence. It was a sham, right? And then you're going back to Austria and Germany. Well, the Austrians and the Germans said, well, hell, self-determination. We're all ethnic Germans, so we're going to create a new country called Germany. It'll be Germany and Austria. And it'll be all the German areas of Europe. And the Allies said, oh, well, no, in your case, it doesn't count. Well, that set them up. The
interesting inverse of that, I guess, as well, is that after you had the formation of Yugoslavia, as well after the Treaty of Versailles, and of course in there you've got Slovenes, Croatians, Bosnians, Herzegovinans, Montenegrins, Serbians, but it's basically Serbia ruling the other countries. Essentially, that's how it turned out. So at the same time, when you had the breakup of Austria and Hungary, you had and of course that's an interesting story in itself, the dual monarchy, the Habsburgs and the Magyars, of course, but who couldn't agree on how to run a piss up in a brewery. But you had all of these various countries that became independent, and then you've got the inverse of that in the Balkans with Yugoslavia, and Serbia, of course, is Russia's ally, that's another story as well. But then you've got this national right to self-determination that applies to everyone except Germany, and then also you have the British and French and everybody pushed Yugoslavia together. Right. So you've got two really interesting dynamics down there.
Yeah, and Yugoslavia was not really a union of Slavic states. It was really Serbia ruling over other Slavic states. Mm-hmm. Really like the Kingdom of Serbia ruling over everybody. And the other groups, like you said, the Croatians, the Macedonians and all of them said, well, wait a minute, what about us? And Woodrow Wilson says, oh, well, buzz off. I don't care about you. So, Woodrow Wilson was a really, to me, he was a very sick person. I mean, sick in an evil way, because he had these goals, right? The goals are, we're going to have world peace. We're going to have this union of countries, a league of nations. We're going to have world peace. But you see, his methods were demented. Like, and he had dictatorial tendencies. And he had a problem that he thought he knew everything. And it's very hard to deal with a person that thinks they know everything. Mm. And so, the Germans say, well, what about us? Oh, well, we don't care. And I'm only worried about Poland. And then, the Vietnamese say, well, what about Vietnam? Oh, I don't care about Asian people. This is a white thing I'm talking about. And the Vietnamese say, well, what? I never heard of Vietnam. Go away. We're having an important meeting. Go back to Asia or something, right? And so then you started that whole trouble over there with France and Vietnam. But this is the kind of attitude this man had. And this is how he would deal with Congress. So he goes back to America. He says, all right, we're going to have the Treaty of Versailles, so just sign it. And the Republicans said, wait a minute, buddy. We've taken over the Senate. You're not going to just tell us what we have to do. Oh, yeah, just sign it. And so when they started asking questions like, well, what about this part of the treaty? Oh, you don't care about peace. You don't care about world peace. And they said, this man's crazy. Who made him vice president of the world? So the Americans never signed the Treaty of Versailles. They never ratified it, I mean to say. They never ratified it. But the main point of all this is that the Germans who wanted self-government did not get it. Austria and Germany were separated, and they did not want to be. And then the Sudetenland, which had always been German-ruled since the days of Charlemagne, gets hooked on to Czechia, and they're so angry about it. So it's almost like if you wanted to start a second world war, this is the way to do it, right?
Yeah, I always argue at the start of the Second World War was it was the Allies that induced it. They had the opportunity to make Germany a friend, as they did after the Second World War, but they never did it because this pretty much.
Now let's take an enemy and make them worse of an enemy. And then we go on, and we can go on about this all day, but we go on to the Soviet Union. They didn't like the Germans didn't like them, but yet they actually cooperated to a large extent. Hitler and Stalin, who are supposed to be philosophical enemies because, the Germans are national socialists. The Soviets are international socialists, which actually we know Stalin was more like a national socialist, wasn't he?
Yeah, there's very little difference. There's very little difference between the Soviet regime and the Nazi regime in a way. I mean, obviously it's well known Hitler didn't like the Jews, but he was very pro-German, whereas, like you said, Stalin he talked about the Slavic peoples, I guess, probably similar to what Nicholas said in a way, Tsar Nicholas, and
right.
Russia, the big Russia was the protector of the Slavic peoples, the Ukrainians, the Belarusians, White Russians, I guess they were called at that time, and then the Baltic states. But interestingly enough, though, just a very minor point is that the Estonians were more related to the Finns, but they were considered Slavic peoples.
Right, but they were more like Finnish. Yeah, that's right. So Stalin claims he's the leader of the world revolution, and nationalism doesn't matter. It's all just the new communist man, right? The new socialist man. But in reality, he really stands for the interest of Russia. He's no different, like you said, than Tsar Nicholas II. He just wants to grab land for Russia. Let's cut to the chase. Well, that's why he got into a big conflict. One of the reasons he got into a big conflict with Trotsky is because Trotsky was more like a pure communist, right? He wanted to have this world revolution, and we'll have a worldwide revolution all at once, and all of that. And Stalin said, "You jackass, that will not work." All right. Well, anyway, and so that leads to another problem. But we know what happened in 1939. They had worked out their Czechia thing because it gave the Germans the Czech Sudetenland. But then Hitler was like a guy in a casino. What happens to these people in the casino when they win a lot of stuff? Do they get out of the casino with their earnings and go home?
They keep going for more.
They always say, well, I'm going to play. I'm going to just play it for one more hour. I'm going to play for one more hour, and then I'm getting out. So Hitler figures he's been rolling the dice. He's been winning all night since 1936. Let's roll it one more time, and we can win with Poland. But he screwed up because this time he rolls the dice, and the British and the French declare war on him. And it's interesting to study that history because his attitude after they declared war on Germany was, well, what do we do now? Imagine that. Imagine your goal, your plan. If you'd have gone to Hitler and said, what is your plan to win the war? He would have said, well, I don't know. I'll think of something. Not a good way to win. So first he's going to team up with Russia. We know how that worked out. And then he goes and he's going to take over Great Britain, and that failed. And when he failed against Great Britain, then the Soviets started acting up. And so then he realized, oh, I'm in a trap. And he made that preemptive attack on Russia. He was paranoid they were going to jump on him, which is probably a good thing to be paranoid about. You're dealing with Stalin. You're not exactly dealing with the nicest guy in the neighborhood. Well, okay, so Germany lost. But the question I'm asking is, did the United States joining World War II make us free or keep us free? My attitude is no, it did not. Germany was not looking to fight America. They weren't even looking to fight England, to be honest. They did not want to go to war with England, no matter what propagandists will tell you.
There was many offers from Hitler to make a peace with Britain. There was quite a few times where Hitler offered peace to Britain, but Churchill rejected it.
That's right. It is not politically correct to say that, but it's the truth. Now, we're not taking up for Hitler, of course. He cut his own throat. Well, too bad for him, because he thought war was the way to make his country strong. He was dead wrong. War destroyed his party and destroyed his country, and it destroyed all these poor German civilians who didn't want to get involved in it, not to mention all the other European peoples. But my point is that the United States chose to go to World War II. They did not have to go. Japan was not looking to fight. I don't care what anybody says. Japan was not looking to fight the United States. This is a fact. Germany was not looking to fight the United States. This is also a fact. Why did Germany and Japan go to war with the United States? Simple answer, because the United States chose to ally herself with Great Britain in that conflict. That is the truth.
Was there not a German plan, though, to invade America? I can't remember what the date of it was. I remember seeing there was a German plan to invade the east coast of America. But of course, it was very few. There was a German plan to invade the east coast of America at some stage.
It's like anything else. These countries have these, what they call scenarios that they look at. And what they'll say is, if these things developed, what would we do in this situation? It wasn't a plan. It was simply an examination of a scenario that was so far-fetched. There wasn't a single person in Germany that would actually believe that such a thing could ever occur. How could Germany invade the United States? They couldn't even get across a 25-mile wide channel between France and England. 25 miles, they couldn't get across that. And they're going to come across a 3,000-mile ocean and invade America? How ridiculous is this? This is preposterous. Why did the United States and Germany get into a conflict? Because the United States was giving Great Britain weapons. Why did the United States and Japan get into a conflict? Because the United States was taking sides. What do I mean? They were taking the side of China.
The oil embargo, yeah.
And they put an embargo on Japan. And why did they put an embargo on Japan? Because they knew. Now, I'm not taking up for Japan. Japan was a very stupid country. Japan chose to attack China in 1931 and then again in 1937. So that's their problem. I'm not taking up for them. But we're not talking about them right now. I'm talking about the United States. And I'm not blaming the soldiers. You will notice that no point in this video did I blame any soldier, did I?
Oh, no point.
They put an oil embargo and a steel embargo on Japan. And what was the purpose? Because they knew that it would destroy Japan's economy. Japan was already not doing well against China. They were not doing well. They were caught in a stalemate. It was bringing Japan's economy down. A lot of Japanese were dying every month. It was not a popular war. And there were no prospects that they were ever going to win this war, in fact. So Japan told the United States, if you put this embargo on us, which is meant to destroy our economy, we will look at this as an act of war, and it will not go unpunished. And they were very clear about that. Roosevelt said, well, too bad. Too bad for you. And so they said, well, okay. And they attacked. Now, it was very stupid for them to attack Pearl Harbor because basically they walked into a trap. And you will never see me now or on any video saying that I have knowledge that Roosevelt knew about this attack. I have never seen one person prove to me that Roosevelt knew about the attack. You know, because there's a right-wing theory that Roosevelt was in a secret plot and he was like, he knew Japan was going to attack Pearl Harbor and he let it happen.
In honesty, I've never heard that one. The Pacific, it's oddly enough, we don't get taught too much about the Pacific War. We're always taught about we're never really taught about what went on in Singapore, and obviously that's, I guess it is a thing with sort of British history. It was a lot of Scottish troops were in Singapore, but it's one of the big things. We were never really taught specifically what Scottish people did in the war, and we don't learn so much about the Pacific theatre other than, of course, that Japan, the atom bombs and things, and this was what ended the war. We never learn about we know Pearl Harbor, of course, but we never get taught about the likes of Okinawa, what the Australians and Americans were up to in New Guinea, and all this. Yeah.
But that's very simple, James, because World War II in the Asia Pacific theater is easy to explain. The Japanese were angry for years because the United States and Great Britain were taking over territory that was very close to their country. So it made them paranoid that they could be the next colony. They did not want to be a colony. So to prevent themselves from becoming a colony, the Japanese, hold on a minute. The Japanese started to militarize their country in the 1800s. It was very successful, and they built up a very strong navy and later air force and army. The only problem is Japan started to catch that imperialism fever.
Yeah.
So they made the foolish mistake of trying to grab other people's land. Oh boy. So they got it.
China, yeah.
Yeah, and then China was weak, so Japan started grabbing China's land. And, it's like a drug addict. They take a little bit of heroin and they say, I can control this. I can control this. Well, of course, they can't. Now, but the Japanese were relatively strong. But in reality, Japan was only about 10% compared to America. You know what I mean? They only had 10% of the strength. And a lot of Japanese government officials warned the military, we cannot fight America. We will be destroyed. Oh, no, we can. The Americans, they had this strange idea. Americans only care about baseball and eating hot dogs. And they're weak. They can't fight. Now, I don't know where they got this idea, because they should have looked at the history of America. So they attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor in this attack and killed 2,000 Americans. Well, that was about the dumbest thing they could ever do, because now the Americans say, rah, 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 remember Pearl Harbor? We're going to get these dirty Japs back, these bunch of Asians. So, and then you have all this racial propaganda. And they're not really humans. So if you kill them, who cares? They're just like animals. It's like killing a dog or a cat. Less than that, a rat, like killing a rat, like vermin. So there was the big counterattack from Great Britain and America. And in 3 years, Japan was annihilated. 3 years, that's not a long time. And the Japanese were bombed with these atom bombs, and it was a big mass murder of civilians. But of course, when you win a war, you don't get in trouble for killing civilians, do you?
No.
Only when you lose. Only when you lose. So the Germans went on trial for killing civilians, and the Japanese went on trial. But the Allies say, oh, well, we don't go on trial. We won. All right. So then, and we're going to wrap this video up because it's going on a long time. But the whole point is that what we're dealing with now since 1944, because when Germany was obviously going to lose, and I made this point in another previous video, when it became obvious that Germany was going to lose, the old animosities cropped up. And the old animosity was Great Britain against Russia. Mm-hmm. And so now we've got this present dynamic of the last 70 years of this, and we see this struggle now every day on the news between the United States and her interests. When I say the United States, I mean the US and Great Britain. But today, Great Britain is the junior partner, whereas before Great Britain was the senior partner. It's kind of flipped. And Russia and her interest. And we noticed that today China is in the Russian sphere because China has realized that, or she thinks that it would be better to team up with Russia because they feel like the Americans are trying to dominate not only Europe, but Asia as well. So you've got Russia and China working together to counter what they look at as the American and British axis. And you look at almost any war of the last 70 years, and it will come from that dynamic of the US and Great Britain versus Russia and China. Now, we know Russia and China had their own neighborhood dispute, did they not?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, they had, there was the whole thing over, there was a bit going on with Tibet and things, but I mean, yeah. There was the whole thing, Korea.
Yeah, Russia and China had a big problem starting in 1959 because after Stalin died, remember Khrushchev, he was going to modernize communism, and Mao, who was so dedicated to Stalin, he hated Khrushchev because Khrushchev had the gall to criticize Stalin. And Mao said, how could you criticize the greatest man who ever lived, aside from Karl Marx? And Khrushchev told Mao, he said, look, this is a bad man. He was a bad man. He was a gangster. And then so Russia and China were arch enemies for a long time, but mainly because the leader of Russia and the leader of China just did not like each other. But after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1989, 91, it really started, it ended in 91, right?
Yeah.
Which is only 24 years ago. And you talked about an opportunity for peace in 1919 where the Allies could have been friends with Germany.
Yeah.
I don't know if you agree with me, but I think when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, there was a great opportunity for peace. The United States could have made friends with Russia.
No, I would agree with that. I would agree with that at that point there. I mean, I think when Gorbachev was still in place, even then at that late stage, I forget what year he came in. Was it 1985 or something? Gorbachev first came in, but then Gorbachev was ousted by the other guy whose name I forget, and it was the other. Yeah. And then Gorbachev was ousted. And if Gorbachev hadn't been ousted, I think essentially Gorbachev might have allowed what happened anyway, because Gorbachev was a bit more of a kind of far leftish social democrat in a way. And I think was it Reagan? I forget the president at the time, but there was the meetings between Gorbachev and the US at that time where there was a lot of goodwill.
Reagan.
It was Reagan, okay. Yeah, and I mean, there was a point, but I do wonder a lot of the time with what goes on in the current media with Putin. Putin actually seems to be quite a reasonable guy when he speaks English, but it's apparently the things when it's funny to me because a lot of the things Putin says are controversial seem to be when he speaks in Russian. So I do wonder how much of a part the media is playing in the Putin thing. But
let me give you my take on that. Reagan had this idea, we're going to end the Cold War, and it looked like by the time Reagan was out of office in '89 that they could just be friends. The Soviet Union had a lot of internal problems, right? And so it was ethnic, economic. All right. So they collapsed in '91. The Russian Empire really collapsed in '91. But the United States did not say, let's be friends. It was almost like in '91, the Bush administration and later Clinton, and then the second Bush, and then now Obama, their attitude has been, now we've got them down, and we're going to kick them while they're down. So the Russians say, wait a minute. What is this all about? We don't need NATO. NATO was set up to defend Europe against a Russian invasion. Well, we have no intention of invading. And actually, they weren't intending to invade in 1945 or in 1955 or 65 or 75 or 85, by the way. But anyway, the Russians said, what is the purpose of NATO now?
Yeah, pretty much.
We're not going to invade you. Why are you lining people up against us? You're lining up our former territories, Ukraine and or you're trying to bring in Ukraine, but all the Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Hungary, Romania, all the countries that were in our sphere of influence, you're lining them up in a military alliance against us. And then you claim that we're being aggressive. Well, in the Russian viewpoint, we have no intention of attacking America or their allies, first of all. Secondly, why are you lining up all our neighbors against us? And then piling up troops and military equipment or whatever in all of these countries near our border. Why do you seem to seek an economic war with us? We have countries along our border which we have ethnic conflicts with. Okay, that's a long-term thing that's been going on for hundreds of years. But every time one of these little things breaks out, we find there's a CIA agent or a British military agent involved with the opposition who's lining up against Russian interests. Now that would make me paranoid, and it's making the Russians paranoid. Now, well, Yeltsin, his problem was he was drunk all the time and he couldn't think straight. Well, they got rid of him, and now we have Putin, who's been around there for 16 years. Well, he can think straight. He's educated. He worked for the
KGB. He was involved in. He was in East Germany.
Yeah, so he knows his stuff. And people will always tell me, "Oh, you're just you love Putin. You think he's so wonderful." I never said that. I'm saying here's a guy who can see what I can see over here in Louisiana. He sees people lining up against his country for no apparent reason, and he's starting to fight back. Now, how does that make him the bad guy? If you read all of his speeches, he'll keep saying, "We're trying to make friends with America." But every time we do it, they provoke some kind of conflict.
Yeah, well, I've seen the same thing in Britain. I mean, as we've discussed a couple of times, there's a big generational difference in Scotland, particularly now. There's a big generational difference in politics, and there was a comment during our independence referendum. This is just an obscure point, I guess, but there was Alex Salmond had said he could see how Putin had helped restore Russian pride and things like that. And of course, the British media jumped on this and said, "Oh, Salmond is pro-Putin," when he really isn't. Salmond wants, he wants the country to be sort of like Switzerland, I guess, where we don't. That's one of the big differences in mentality between Scotland and England, is that we don't want to be a world player. We just want to get on with our own things but look to the outside world and see what the outside world's doing. But we want our own independence in that way, I guess.
Right. Well, some Scottish, but now Putin, he's saying, you read what Putin says. We want amity, friendship with America and Great Britain. We want to trade. You buy our products, we'll buy your products. Your people could come visit our country on a vacation. We'll go visit your country on a vacation. But then what do we get? We get this like plotting all the time against us. And then when I speak up about it, I'm the bad guy. I'm the bad guy. Now, the Americans say, well, why do you get so angry when we pile up troops along your border? Why are you so paranoid? Why am I paranoid? Now, this goes back to 1961. It's the same old dynamic. The United States put nuclear missiles right along the Russian border in Turkey, like literally 1 mile from the border, and said, "How you like that?" Well, the Russians said, "We don't like it too much. Why don't you get those missiles off our border?" Oh, Kennedy said, "Oh, go to hell." So then Kennedy got very scared when the Russians put nuclear missiles in Cuba and said, "How do you like that? 90 miles from Florida." "Oh, no, this is World War III. You can't do that." Khrushchev said, "Well, this is a response to what you're doing. You put nuclear missiles 1 mile from our border and you said it was not a problem, deal with it. We put nuclear missiles on your border and now you're threatening to go to war." So in other words, what Putin does, they'll say, "Pow, we punched you in the chin." Well, then he'll say, "Well, I'll just flick you in the ear." "Oh, you're trying to invade Sweden. There were Russian planes flying to Sweden." Well, then in reality, they were just flying in the Baltic in a neutral area. And the media tries to spin it like they're trying to, so it's like he's saying, no, if you threaten us, of course we're going to respond. We don't feel comfortable with British and American planes coming at our country. So then when we do it to you, it's on the news. When you do it to us, it's not covered. And look at Syria. Syria is a longtime Russian ally. And what did the Americans seem to be trying to do? Bring down the Syrian government. Oh, well, deal with it. So, and I know a lot of people watching this video are going to say, you didn't talk about 9/11, you didn't talk about Iraq, you didn't talk about Afghanistan. Well, you know what? The United States chose to insert herself into the Arab-Israeli conflict of 1948 to the present. When Israel declared independence and the Arabs attacked, how on earth did that affect the security or peace or freedom of America?
That conflict though goes back to religious influence. It's the whole thing with the Crusades. You go back to the Crusades, the Christians didn't want the Muslims having control of Jerusalem and things like that. That was the whole influence behind it. Yeah.
Is this the year 1069? I mean 1096. Is this 1096 or is this 2015? They asked Bill Clinton, why are you helping Israel fight the Arabs? He said, well, my Sunday school teacher told me that in the Bible it said that if we ever stopped helping Israel, God would not be happy with America. So we're going to help Israel because it's in the Bible. This is Bill Clinton, you know, the great liberal Bill Clinton. Wait a minute. I would encourage all Sunday school attendees to form their own personal army and go help Israel. This is not, in my opinion, something the United States should be doing. We should be friends with the Arabs and the Israelis. We should not be giving the Arabs and the Israelis, either one of them, a single dime or any bit of military equipment.
Mm-hmm.
And people say, well, what if the Arabs tried to destroy Israel? I say, well, that's their problem, but that's not really going to happen. You know, that's all propaganda. And then they talk about Iran, you know, I'm so sick of hearing about Iran.
Mm-hmm.
People don't know the history of Iran. You know what happened to Iran? The United States and Great Britain tried to take their country over in the 1800s, and they didn't like it.
And there's the whole thing just now. I work with some Iranians in Germany, and still the Iranians are demonized in the British press, and the Iranians that I worked with in Germany were lovely people. And yeah, no, it's just the way it works. A lot of the stuff that goes on in the world today is the media that induced it, and the media are all linked to various political parties and
various ethnic factions. And let's close this out. Now let's talk about the big thing that people always drop on me. They say, what about 9/11? Well, I know you know about that. Okay, well, let's talk about 9/11 for a minute. And I don't mean conspiracy theories, because I don't want to hear about all that. But let's look at Afghanistan. Now, Afghanistan was a country that Great Britain and Russia had been trying to take over since the 1800s. You've heard of the Great Game.
Oh, yeah.
Plotting against each other to take over Afghanistan for years. Well, they decided just to leave it as a neutral spot in between Russia and India. Well, you don't mess with Afghanistan and we won't mess with it. So they kind of left it in the middle. Fine. But after World War II, the Russians and the United States started plotting over Afghanistan. Well, you know how they do. The United States started sending in people to prop up Afghanistan into our sphere of influence, and the Russians did the same thing. Well, in 1973, there was an overthrow in Afghanistan. The king of Afghanistan was overthrown by a pro-Russian faction. Well, that's when all hell broke loose, because the United States started helping the rebels to fight against the government, which was backed up by the Soviet Union. This is 42 years ago. And who are the rebels? The Mujahideen. The Islamic radicals. And the Russians told President Nixon and Carter, Nixon, Ford, Carter, and Reagan, why are you helping these people? These are Muslim radicals, they're terrorists, and they're bad. You should not be helping these people. They are dangerous people. The United States said, oh, no, 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 you're the bad guy. We're going to help these people. Now, there was a man from Arabia named Osama bin Laden, who was an Arab nationalist and a Wahhabist, a Wahhabi. And he had a lot of money. And he decided he was going to use his money to what? Help Muslims fight the Russians and the Americans. He started the headquarters, the Al-Qaeda, that means the headquarters in Arabic. So first thing he did was he helped the Afghanistanis fight the Russians. He was in league with the Americans. So they fought the Russians, boom, boom, boom. Just like the Vietnam War, they fought the Russians. And in 1989, the Russians said, okay, fine, our country's collapsing. We don't have time to play around with Afghanistan. We're out of here. We're leaving. But they said to America, you're going to be sorry with who's going to take over. So who took over Afghanistan in 1992? Muslim radicals. Then in 1996, an even worse group took over, the Taliban. They were more radical than the radicals. And Russia told the United States, well, shame on you. We told you, but now look what you've got. The United States said, oh, well, we didn't know this was going to happen. So then bin Laden had his second project. He told, now, this is a fact. He told Bill Clinton, I am mad at America. And I'll tell you the two main reasons I'm mad at America. Why? Now, this is what they tell us on TV, because we're free. I don't like the American women wearing bikinis at the beach. This is a lie. He did not say that. He did not care what Americans did. He said, I'm angry at America because of two reasons only. There are American troops in Saudi Arabia, the holy Muslim land, you know, since 1990. Remember with Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm? The second gripe he had was the United States is helping the Zionists in Israel. So I'm declaring war on America now. In other words, if the United States would stop helping Israel and get the troops out of Saudi Arabia, all the problems would dissolve. Well, you know, Al-Qaeda did not have a great army and navy and air force. So the way they figured they could hurt America was through these, what you call creative attacks, right?
Stealth attacks, yeah.
And so they did the airplane attacks in 2001 and killed a lot of Americans. This was not a country that did it. It was bin Laden's little gang. And then they went to Afghanistan and said, you are letting this man hide out in your country, so you got to turn him over to us. And you know, the truth is that the Afghanistan said, well, okay, you can take him. Oh, well, what we mean is you have to let our army occupy your country. The Taliban said, well, what are you talking about? We're going to turn the guy over to you. No, no, no. You have to let our army come in and take over your country, and then we'll have peace. They said, what kind of deal is that? In other words, if we don't let you invade, you'll invade. And they said, yeah, that's right. So, well, they said, well, then you'll have to invade. So they invaded, and then they supposedly killed bin Laden. You know, they told us that on TV. And then they took over Afghanistan, and it's been a quagmire ever since, right? And then they attacked Iraq in 2003. Nobody knows what the reason was for that. Maybe you could tell me, because I'm still trying to figure out why.
I think it was to do with oil, pretty much. It's probably the motive of it, the motive of it, but yeah. And
look at the wonderful benefits of that.
Oh yeah.
We got rid of Saddam, who was a fool, I'll admit, but he wasn't an Islamist. He was a secularist who protected Catholics, Muslims, and non-religious people.
Because the media tells us now that it's between Shia and Sunni, but it's not. The country's been taken over by gangsters, pretty much.
Yeah, it's between warlords.
Yeah, so no, it's the same idea between the IRA and the UVF. It's warlords. It's not about people.
Oh, yeah, and they sell drugs and everything to make money. And so Iraq and Afghanistan have been a Pandora's box. But the whole point, does that keep us free? Does that protect us?
Not at all.
Does that protect Great Britain? Because now, this is what they say on TV all the time. I'm glad you're over there dying to keep my country free. Oh, you mean Afghanistan was going to invade Massachusetts? Iraq was going to invade California? Are we supposed to believe such a fantasy?
It's a lot of young guys over here under that deserving freedom, but in reality, and while nobody questions their bravery and their sacrifice, what they're really fighting for is, it's unbeknown to them, is they're really fighting for their government's monetary interests.
Right, so how would it sound if they were to say, you should go over there and die so that our country can dominate the world? Now that would not attract too many people.
Yeah, exactly right.
So that the United States and Great Britain can run the world. Now, the France doesn't make any such claims. You know, they're more practical. They just control Africa, and they're happy with that. So the French soldiers get to go die in Mali and in Chad and in Cote d'Ivoire and Niger, so that France can continue their empire that they never really gave up in the 1960s. But they don't say we're trying to keep our country free. They just say we're trying to protect French interests.
Yeah.
So they're more truthful imperialists.
Yeah, well, that's a big issue in Scotland now as well. A lot of people don't like the idea that David Cameron, if you go and listen to the likes of David Cameron and Nigel Farage, who are the Conservative and UKIP party leaders, they still believe that Britain is a world power today. And you know, the truth is that Germany has Britain's economy by the balls, and the economy is over reliant on finance. Obviously a very, very volatile sector, and it's the same thing. Like David Cameron, they've got a nuclear missile program, which one, they're never going to use, and two, they're spending a hell of a lot of money on, and it's a complete waste. And it's this whole idea of imperialism. The British, the establishment in London still believe that Britain is a world power when, you know, it's a very deluded belief. That's a very, very deluded belief to hold, I think.
Well, I don't know, James. I think Great Britain is a world power. They're not the premier world power, but I would say they're part of a world power. They're part of a team, and the team is called America and Great Britain. And that team is very powerful. And that team's been working together since at least 1915. And it sounds terrible to say it, but sometimes you got to speak the truth, and you may not make friends doing it. But, you know, I've made a lot of enemies with this anti-war approach. But, and I'm not against America, and I'm not against Scotland or England, and I'm not against freedom, but that word means different things to different people. But I certainly cannot support all of these worldwide wars that are almost never for the reason that they claim that they're for.
Well, this was a big reason for me as well. I come from a big military family, a lot of Air Force and things like that. And my uncle, who is now in Australia, it's interesting to speak to him because he's very disillusioned with this whole thing. He agrees on the premise that it's a world power. But like I say, we've got this. They're talking now about they're going to renew their nuclear weapons program, which is £100 billion. So somewhere in the region of $55–60 billion. In fact, no, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. That's going to be about $150 billion or something like that to replace this nuclear weapons program. And for what purpose?
Imagine how much money could have been saved if the United States would have decided to be friends with Russia in 1991 instead of seeking conflict with them. I think we could look at how almost all of these world problems today could have melted away. Think of all the things that could have been built, all the progress that could have been made instead of all the destruction that have been brought upon the world by seeking out enemies where they don't exist.
Yeah, I mean, the key thing would have been, as you say, you could invited Russia to join NATO.
Well, my opinion is that they should dissolve NATO.
Oh, yeah, that's the other way to do it, yeah.
But the Russians say, well, let us join NATO. Oh, no. It's a defensive alliance. And the Russians say, well, we want to be part of that. We believe in collective security, too. Well, because it's against you. I mean, no, well, it's not against you. It's for, blah, blah, blah. But they don't know what to say because everybody knows that NATO is only in existence to be against Russia. I mean, a child could figure this out.
Yeah.
But I would say we should dissolve NATO. But anyway, we could go on forever, but I know it's very late in Scotland right now.
Yeah,
it's been a fascinating conversation, at least for me.
Oh yeah, no, I've enjoyed it as well. We'll do a few more videos of maybe something a bit more current event-ish at some point as well would be quite interesting.
Yeah, and that's where our alliance will probably break down.
Yeah, it will be interesting nonetheless. We can get a few peers or something in and do that.
Yes, I agree. Well, have a very good night, and thank you for joining me in this.
Well, enjoy your game. Who is it you're watching tonight?
It's probably already started. I got to go turn on. It's a college baseball game.
Oh, okay.
Louisiana State University is playing in a baseball game. So,
Oh, I have an old Louisiana State University. Yeah. Yellow. Yeah.
Purple and yellow. Okay.
Yeah,
well,
I had LSU Tigers on it in my travels over there.
Oh, okay. That's good.
That was many. I'm not sure. Fine.
Yeah, fine. I'd like to see that. Okay. Well, have a good evening. And thanks for watching, folks.
No worries. Thanks. And then we'll do another one of these soon, I'm sure.
Let's try it. Let's keep doing it. Okay. Thanks.
Sure.